everybody, in this video I'm going to be showing you how I transfer what I can see on my still life setup onto the canvas, and I do that using a grid method. Not all the time, but in a lot of my paintings I do. The way I've got my still life setup arranged is it's on a shelf right beside the canvas. I could use the site size method, where I basically transfer measurements across onto the canvas, and the image will be exactly the same size as the setup itself. But in this painting that I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to use the grid method, and rather than dividing my photograph up into a grid, I'm going to use a viewfinder like this. The great thing with a viewfinder is you can obviously move it backwards and forwards, and you can decide through the moving it backwards and forwards how big you want the objects in your still life to appear on the canvas. So of course, if I put this really close to my still life setup, the objects are going to fill a large area of the canvas. But if I move this further away from the setup, I can adjust visually how big they appear. And then when I'm happy with that adjustment and where the objects appear, I then mark the grid onto my canvas, hold this in the same place, and I can then draw them in. That does present some problems, in that obviously you have to position this in the same place every time. So when I'm holding this up, I've got to make sure that my arm is the same distance away from my eyes each time. And what I usually do is I'll find key points within the image that I will line up with key points in this grid. So for example, I might have something line up where these two lines cross, and every time I hold this up, I make sure that that's in the same position. The reason I prefer to do this rather than dividing up a photograph is, firstly, as I've said, I can adjust this. I mean, yes, I could take another photograph, but I can adjust this to how I want it. The other thing is, I find sometimes when I refer to the photograph, the position and proportions of the objects in the image are slightly different to where I'm then sat afterwards when I'm doing the painting. Because I'm sat right in front of the canvas, and when I've taken the photograph I may have been in a slightly different position, the objects then appear slightly different on the photograph, if that makes sense. So I much prefer to hold this up when where I'm actually going to do the drawing from, and then paint in the same position, and everything seems to fall into place much better. And the other thing is, I do take a photograph. You can see it up on the TV screen here as a reference, but when I'm painting I don't refer to this. In fact, a lot of the time I won't even have this switched on. I prefer to work directly from the still life, and the reason I take a photograph is that if I'm painting some organic material like fruit, or in this one I've got some leaves, they will change position. The leaves will wilt, the fruit will begin to wrinkle up and that kind of thing. So I may have to replace them, and having a photograph is a good form of reference so that I can see how things were positioned, and if I do have to replace them I can get them as similar to the original as possible. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you how that would work with the canvas. Okay, so here's my still life setup with the canvas on the easel right by the side of it. And the first thing that I have to do is to divide the canvas up into the same number of squares that I have on my grid. Okay, so that's just a simple case of marking the grid out. I don't want the grid lines to be too dominant. We just do 15. So I'll mark these reasonably faint. I'll do them probably a bit stronger, a bit bolder today, just due to the fact that I'm filming this. Okay, I use a set square just to make sure that they are vertical and horizontal. Okay, so now I've got my grid marked out. What I'm going to do is hold this in the position that I want to get my image in. So now I don't know how this is relating to the camera. Obviously I'm slightly to the side of the camera, and I'm trying to compose the setup how I want it in the viewfinder. Now you are obviously slightly, so I want something like this. Okay, when I hold this up, obviously I'm directing this so as though my eyes were in line with the camera. I'm going to have to position it slightly different. Okay, hopefully this angle will allow you to see things better. So again, I'm holding this up where I want it in front of the still life. It's approximately there, and I'm using the lines that I've already marked on for the shelf to make sure that I get this in the same position every time. And now what I want to do is start to mark in other features that I can then refer to. So the thing is, you have to hold it absolutely dead still. Okay. Right, the tall bottle on the right hand side is approximately here. I'll mark that in, and then again hold that up, and the bottom of that bottle, make sure I get this right, bottom of that bottle is just below here. Okay. Now, the other bottle, the smaller of the two bottles, it starts, the edge of it is around about there. How wide is it? So every time I'm making these marks, I then reposition the grid in the same place every time so that I can get it accurate. So it's almost, it's about here, I would say, the small bottle. So that's the width of the small bottle. And the tall bottle disappears behind the other one, but the right hand side of it is approximately there. And where's the top of the small bottle now? So you can see that's how I begin to build the drawing. When I do the bottles, I will draw them out and I will check the symmetry, and I'll show you how I do that in a moment. Okay, so then I've got everything sort of roughly marked in, and then what I'm going to do is just tidy up the bottles and make sure they're symmetrical. And the way I do that is I will draw them out free. I will draw the bottle out freehand, and then I will trace one side of the bottle so that this shoulder, I can then flip the tracing paper over and check that this curve here is the same both sides, and I'll do the same with this bottle. So essentially I draw the bottle out, place the tracing paper over the top, and check that the curves are the same. Okay, and I'll be developing this painting all week, and no doubt there'll be adjustments as I go on.